Yeah, we are live now on YouTube.
Okay.
I welcome everyone back to the last session on the second day. We have with us Professor Prajval Shastri from Indian Institute of Astrophysics. She's an astrophysicist and has obtained her PhD from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Then Professor Prajval Shastri uh, was a visiting scholar at the Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore. She did a postdoc fellowship at Department of Astronomy, University of Texas, Austin, and then did another postdoc at Department of Astronomy, University of California, Berkeley, USA. She was a visiting scientist at Harvard Smithson Center for Astrophysics, USA. She's a Fulbright scholar, Stanford University, USA, distinguished visitor, Australian National University, Australia. She had a tenure faculty at Indian Institute of Astrophysics, Bangalore, and her areas of interest are uh, black holes and AGNs, physics of active galactic galaxies using radio, optical, ultraviolet, X-ray, and gamma ray observations. These are one of the most fascinating things in astrophysics, and Professor Shastri is an expert at it. So I hand over Professor Shastri to speak on gender inequity in sciences. What is the way forward? Prajwal.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Najam, and thank you everyone for having me on this course. It is indeed a pleasure to share some thoughts with you. There is a sort of subtext to my title, which is that are we really scientific in our science practice? And I hope at the end of this, you will be a little bit convinced that these two questions are actually related. So as Najam said, my core interest is the physics of black holes, giant black holes in particular, which we know are in the centers of distant galaxies, just like in the center of our own Milky Way. This is a picture of our Milky Way. And black holes are chunks of space-time from which even light cannot escape. And that idea can come very, very intuitively from the idea of escape velocity, which all of you, even though you're not all physics people, you will remember your high school physics and the idea of escape velocity. And so if we use that idea and assign escape velocity as the velocity of light, then we get a formula which is a relationship between the size and the mass, and that is what defines a black hole. And using fairly simple ideas of Keplerian orbits and so on, plus more complicated ideas from general relativity, we can seek to study black holes. And one of the most exciting results in recent times has been this particular galaxy of stars, which has a giant black hole in its center, and a group of scientists were able to actually image the silhouette of that giant black hole, which is what is shown in the bottom right here. So that was a very exciting result. And I really wish I could have told you more about this, but unfortunately, unfortunately, I have to talk about something else. In my career, which is more than 3 decades, I have primarily worked in this area. And whenever I went to a conference, let's say, or a meeting which discussed the science of black holes, as you can imagine, black holes have no gender, right? But in these conferences, there would hardly be any women to start with, and over the decades, inching along, maybe now you get about 25% women. So then you wonder why that is. If black holes are not gendered, then why are there only a maximum of 25% women in these conferences. So it is a much bigger question, as you all know, and the bigger question is, why is a gender gap in the sciences? It's not just about black hole conferences, it's about many other things as well. So that is the question I will try to address today. And unfortunately, we have to address that. As I said, I would have loved to talk to you about black holes and distant galaxies, but we do have a problem in the sciences, and so therefore we need to talk about this question. So first of all, it is really, really important to understand that trying to ask the question, why is there a gender gap in the sciences, is not about getting favors for women, and it is not about the complaints of a few disgruntled women. This is really, really important to digest at a very deep level, because one of the, shall we say, obstacles to addressing the problem of the gender gap is because a lot of people think that these efforts are about getting favors for women, and a lot of people think that it's just complaints by a few disgruntled women. Sorry, there's a typo there, but this is not about the rants of a few disgruntled women. It is also very important that it's about looking at the evidence. And we are all scientists, right? And we are trying to address a problem within the sciences. So it should come naturally to us that we need to look at the evidence. So what is the evidence? Najam, are you able to see my cursor when I'm moving it around?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So it is also about understanding that women are people. This seems a little obvious, but the way things play out in our profession, it turns out that that's not the case. So we need to bring that back into our profession, that women are really people. The other thing is, I at the very outset want to make a distinction between sex and gender. So gender does not mean sex. Gender does not mean women. I mean, this is also really important. So sex is biological, whereas gender is socially constructed. So what does that mean? A social construct is something that does not exist in nature, but is invented by society, and we all act as if it exists, and by our tacit agreement, it does. That is what is a social construct. So examples of social constructs in this context, for example, is that, for example, men should not wear saris or skirts, right? So this is not something that is given to us by nature, but it is something that is invented by society, and we all act as if that's the rule. And so by our tacit agreement, it becomes a rule. Similarly, women don't drive buses, or women don't play the nadaswaram, right? So, and then there are more subtle things as well, that, things like men should not cry, or women should be faithful to their husbands, and so on. So just for fun, I wanted to show you these two pictures. So here you have somebody called Kalishadi Mehboob, who's playing the nadaswaram. And here is a picture of me taken on March for Science Day with this person called Mamata, and Mamata is a bus driver. She's not driving a bus here because this was taken when she came to my astrophysics talk, but she does drive a bus. So this is just to say that, to make you, to kind of convey to you that gender is really a social construct. It is not given to us by nature, and so we learn how to be men and women. We are taught how to be men and how to be women. So to go back to this, let me convey a little bit about what is the global context. So this is not about sciences, this is overall. And there was something called the Global Gender Gap Report, which comes out every year. Unfortunately, I was not able to remake this slide for 2020, but it is not hugely different. So what each of these diagrams here is showing is, I don't know if you can read this, but there are four axes here. One, 2, 3, and 4. And these axes are economy, education, health, and politics. Politics means, representational politics. And so this World Economic Forum, they ranked all countries along these axes. And if you have a country which has achieved complete parity between men and women uh, in a given parameter, which means which is one of these four: economy, education, health, and politics. The point for that country would be at the edge of this circular diagram. And if a country has achieved parity on all four fronts, then the result would be a sort of a diamond, which look like that. All right. Now, the reality is that the average for the world is this black quadrilateral. So it is showing that parity on education is almost equal. Parity on health is almost equal as a global average. And parity in economy is relatively poor, and parity in politics is extremely poor. And so you have this, instead of having a diamond, you have this very skewed quadrilateral. And the blue, shaded blue, is the situation for that particular country. So this thick blue line is common in all these figures. And the shaded blue is for that country. So this is India. It has a rank, fairly dismal rank of 87 in 2016. Bangladesh has a higher rank than India, but not much higher. And then Bhutan has a much lower rank. Here's the United States, which is somewhere in between. Iceland is the topper. So Iceland, you can see that the shaded blue is approaching a square or a diamond. And Rwanda is also pretty high rank. That is an interesting story, which I won't get into right now. And this is evolution with time. There is a global index, which is for everything, and this is by region. So each of these curves is for the different regions: East Asia and the Pacific, Latin America, etc. The blue is Western and Eastern Europe. Here on top, who have the best situation. They started out the best in 2006 when these data were first compiled, and they continue to be pretty high in 2019. This is 2016, and so South Asia, which is the red curve, which would have a huge contribution by India, is not that good at all. In fact, it has gone slowly rising up to 2016, but after that, it is almost reduced or at best plateaued, as you can see here. So this is 2016 and the red curve, and you can see that it is either reducing or plateaued since 2016. Until 2016, there was considerable improvement. So that is the global picture overall, not for sciences, and the picture for India relative to the overall picture. Now, in the sciences, things are not that much better. And in fact, there was concern from very early on, and the Indian National Science Academy commissioned a report which was headed by Mehta Bamji, and they published it in 2004, where they called for fairly proactive measures in order to address the gender gap and all that. There was the study that Anita Kurup from NIAS and collaborators headed, which was commissioned by the Indian Academy of Sciences, which said, train scientific women power, how much are we losing and why? And they also had a very detailed study. And the government of India, of course, has long recognized the problem. And this is a statement by Kapil Sibal in 2008, who says, "It seems to me that we have developed in science and technology a stratified system in which men are favored with career advancements at the expense of women." And so the government did fund a lot and everything, and there have been all these studies and all that. But even as of, these are figures as of 2017, the Indian Academy of Sciences physics fellows are only 6% women. And if you look at Physics Institute governing councils, there are only 3% women. I chose physics here not just because I'm a physicist, but also because physics has the worst of the gender gaps in all the sciences most of the time. This cannot be seen as a whole lot of improvement. Uh, so, what are the explanations for the gender gap in science? So these are some of the popular explanations that I have listed. Well, I shouldn't say popular, but these are some of the explanations I've listed. Lack of interest in science among girls is a very popular explanation. And people try to explain the gender gap in sciences using this. Secondly, they say it's systematically lower competence among women to do science. Thirdly, people say girls are socialized to feel incompetent in science. So they're not really incompetent in science, but they're socialized to feel so. And that is why there is a gender gap. Fourthly, people say it's the discriminatory familial responsibilities on women which prevent them from achieving their full potential. And finally, and this is not a very popular explanation, there is the idea that there is discrimination against women within the profession. So let us look at what the evidence tells us about each of these ideas. So, in the Indian context, so I'm going to focus on the Indian context. So, lack of interest in science among girls. Okay, so how true is this? So there is a study done by Malhotra and Joshi in 2018 where they looked at four schools in Dehradun, 8th, 9th and 10th standard children. And these are the data about the schools, and they looked at what is their interest. So here they're not looking at performance, but they're looking at interest in these science subjects. So maths, physics, chemistry, and biology. And while they did find that the boys and girls statistics differed, there was at least a minimum of 30% girls said that they like science subjects. So 30% is a very large number. It doesn't suggest, I mean, there is a question, why isn't it 50%? But it doesn't suggest that there is a lack of interest in science among girls. Okay, then here are data from the Inspire Student Fellowship. So you probably know that DST has a scheme of Inspire Fellowships where students at the end of 12th standard give this exam and so on. And if they get the fellowship, then they get a scholarship to do science, BSc and MSc. And if you look at those student fellowships, it's a fairly, it's a national competition and so on. And it's not a trivial competition, so you have to prepare for it. And clearly there are a lot of girls preparing for it. And overall science, 57% of the fellowships were won by girls in this was 2015. And if you look at only physics, then 50% of the girls won the physics fellowships, for Inspire fellowships. So this certainly doesn't tell us that there's a lack of interest in science among girls. This plot here is the summer student fellowships which the Indian Academy of Sciences gives. And there again, since 2012, more girls than boys are selected for these fellowships. So this is more than 50% and it's climbing. And the dark blue are there's a mistake here, sorry. The purple, light purple are the applications, and the dark blue are the ones who are selected. So both the applications and the selected have a larger fraction of girls, and the selected does track the applications as well. So, and then board exams. I mean, board exams, it's quite common for girls to outperform boys in board exams, and female enrollment in undergraduate science is about 40%. And yeah, so none of these data support the idea that there is a lack of interest in science among girls. And so I'm going to cross that out. Now, going to the second one, is there a systematically lower competence among women to do science? Again, if you look at the Inspire faculty fellowships, these are fellowships again through a national competition, fairly rigorous after PhD and so on. 38% women won the fellowship in 2015 and later as well, and physics is 37%. So it's not equal, but it hardly suggests to us that women are less competent than men. There was a survey done by Jayashree Subramanian, published in 2014, where she surveyed a whole bunch of men and women scientists and looked at their university marks. So these were people who had joined as scientists, but what were their qualifications before they joined? And she found that there were more women with high ranks. So this is blue is women, red is men, and this is rankers, and this is low rankers. And she found that there were much fewer women with low rank compared to the men. And then there is this study by Kumar in 2001, where she surveyed a bunch of scientists in 4 different institutions across the country. She anonymizes the institutions, and she measured productivity of these scientists, and she using the scholarly publications, and she found that there was no productivity deficit among the women. So that can't be, it can't be that women are less competent, and therefore it can't be the reason for the gender gap. Now, what about socialization leading girls to feel incompetent in science? So again, going back to this Malhotra and Joshi study, I mean, this idea has not been studied a lot. And, you know, I'm not a social scientist myself, but, you know, I've come across these studies, and then some of them get published in Current Science and so on, so other people access it. But it's the studies are very, very few. Anyway, this study, Malhotra and Joshi, which I referred to earlier, they asked the question. So these studies are about perceptions, right? So they asked the question. They put the statement to the students saying fewer girls than boys are interested in higher studies in science and maths. Is this true? Is this false? Or you don't know the answer? Okay. And as you can see, so this is the statistics of people who said yes, who said no, and who said don't know. And the blue is women, girls, and the red is boys. So let me show you here. And then this asks what are the reasons why fewer girls are interested in higher studies in science and math? And this reason says girls are not good at science and maths. This is the reason that parents do not want them to study science and maths. This says science and maths is difficult and girls go for the easier subjects. And this is this fraction of the people said they don't know the reason, or they didn't give a reason. Okay, so you can see here that girls are not good at science and maths. No girls felt that. Only the boys felt that, a few of them. Parents do not want them to study science and maths. Yeah, a lot of both girls and boys agreed with this particular reason, although boys agreed with it more than the girls. Science and maths is difficult and girls go for easier subjects. Many more boys than girls said yes to this, and no reason given, there were more girls. So, what Malhotra and Joshi conclude is that there is a male stereotype idea for science, and that this idea is transmitted to people very early. So more boys than girls think that science is a male domain. Boys were much less optimistic about girls taking up higher studies in science and maths. More boys believe that the study of science and maths is difficult and girls want to study easier subjects. And more than 50% of the boys and more than 25% of the girls have not yet formed an opinion. So, what they suggest, Malhotra and Joshi suggest, is that in high school itself, this is the right time because more than 50% of the boys had not yet made up their minds about this, although a lot of boys believe that girls don't want to do difficult subjects, and girls don't believe that. So, therefore, high school is the time not to teach girls science, right? Not to bring them up to speed, but to teach boys mostly, and also girls, that girls are equally competent at doing science. So, this socializing, it does seem to hold that boys are socialized to think that girls are bad at science. So that is a factor. So now what about the fourth one? Discriminatory familial responsibilities on women. How much does that contribute to the gender gap? Okay, what does the data say? So a large number of women do make use of the government's career break fellowships for women, which have been in place for many years now, which suggests that yes, discriminatory familial responsibilities do impact women scientists. Just to give you a global context, there is no country where men spend the same amount of time on unpaid work as women. And in countries where the ratio is lowest, it is still twice as much. This is a global survey of physicists, which was done in published in 2014. And unfortunately, there were not too many respondents from India. But for one particular set of questions, there were enough respondents from India that one could do a histogram. These are not published data, but these are data from Rachel Ivey, who's the PI of this. And this statistic shows that 62% of the men physicists and only 46% of the women physicists reported that they were in a long-term relationship, either married or in a long-term relationship from India. And 75% of the men and 43% of the women, that is much fewer women, reported that they were either the parent or the guardian of children. But only 53% of the women and as much as 77% of the men reported that careers changed their personal decisions. So this hints that discriminatory familial responsibilities is quite a significant factor in causing the gender gap. But the value of the gender gap correlates with academic discipline. So here I have a plot which shows the fraction of women science faculty in Indian academia, which means these are UGC data, so all research institutions, universities, colleges, PhDs, obviously. So what is the fraction of female science
But it should continue here, no?
there's only 19% who are women.
Yeah, okay.
So, did you lose me for a bit?
Yeah, we lost the sound, but maybe it was only at our end.
But we
Okay. Okay. So, yeah. So, should I repeat this plot thing?
Yep, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So, here's a plot which shows the fraction of women science faculty in Indian academia. So, all academic institutions, from colleges to universities to research institutions. And you can see that in 1975, it was not abysmal, but rather low, close to 20-25%, and then it has climbed steadily and it almost reached 45-50%. So this is all disciplines, right? And if you look at physics, the fraction is only 19%. So what this is telling us is that there are some science disciplines which are where the gender gap is much lower. Now, if discriminatory familial responsibilities was the only reason for the gender gap, then it would not change with discipline, right? All disciplines would show the same fraction. So it cannot be the whole reason. There's obviously it contributes some amount, but it cannot be the whole reason why there is a gender gap in the sciences. And so that leaves us with discrimination within the profession, and this is a very, very tricky subject, as you can imagine, because it means that we all have to look inwards and look at the processes within our profession rather than elsewhere in society. So discriminatory familial responsibilities is an easy thing to talk about because one can claim it's outside in society, and within science we are all very objective and everything, and we don't have any discrimination, but the data don't support that idea. So again, the study by Neelam Kumar, which I mentioned earlier, where she showed that there is no productivity deficit among women, she also showed that there was a correlation between gender and position in the hierarchy. So even though there is no difference in the productivity, there was a difference in the position in the hierarchy, and the mean age of women who were professors or equivalent was slightly higher than that for men. So women have to wait longer in order to get the same position. She concluded that women's status in the institution depend on factors other than competence, indicating that particularism in the form of gender discrimination exists there. So now if I go back to this plot again, this was, I showed you earlier, the fraction of women among science faculty in Indian academia, and this is a fraction for academy fellows. Now, academy fellows are chosen from people who have a science PhD and are employed, right? So that is from this pool. So if this pool has women at a fractional rate of, say, in 1995, the fractional rate is 35%, then the academy also should have that kind of a rate, right? But it's only 3%. And in 2014, when the fraction here has climbed to 45%, in the academy, it is only 7%. So why should there be a difference? It is understandable that because this academy fellowship thing is an honor position which acknowledges very high achieving accomplishments and so on, not all of these people will become academy fellows. That is understandable. That is only a small fraction of these people will become academy fellows. But why should there be a difference in the fraction of the women? That is the question. It should simply reflect this fraction. Now coming just to physics, the fraction of employed physics PhDs in academia is 19%. Now we can ask the question why, of course, and I already addressed that a little bit. But given that this is the pool, why are the fractions in academy fellows, in our Indian Physics Association C.V. Raman physics lectures, in Physics Institute governing councils, why is the fraction so low? If this is 19%, each of these should have been 19%. Whereas Academy Fellows is only around about 6%. Raman lectures was 4%. Here I'm happy to say that the Indian Physics Association constituted a gender and physics working group, and once that working group was constituted, this fraction has climbed quite significantly. Physics Institute governing councils are still very low. Uh, Discrimination within the profession was also hinted at by Kurup and Maitre, which came from that Indian Academy of Sciences report. And they say data from our study revealed that many women who are currently working have lost job opportunities due to the informal policies that prevent couples from working together in the same organization. So these women were refused positions not because they were not competent, but because there was a non-merit reason that they already had a spouse working in these institutions. And so that is something that really needs to be paid attention to. Now, in March of 2017, a group of us decided that we would bring out special editions of these three science magazines. So, Resonance, Physics News, and Current Science, with an all women authorship. The reason was that when we looked at the author distribution of Resonance, so I don't know how many of you know about Resonance, but Resonance is a magazine every month that is published by the Indian Academy of Sciences, and it targets sort of undergraduate level science students and also adult science buffs, and has science overview articles from a variety of scientific disciplines. Now remember that remember this plot that we have about 45% of women who are PhDs in science in academia. So then why does Resonance have such a small fraction of women authors in its publications? So these are, hello, am I not audible?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So this is for the years 2014, 2015, and 2016. And it shows you the green is the number of articles, total articles, and the red and the blue are the fraction of men and women authors in Resonance. Now, these are not articles which are seen as, these are not research publications. These are just overview articles written for a general audience. And the pool from which the authors are drawn have a women fraction of 45% at least, if not 50%, because this is all disciplines. But they are invited to write these articles. And clearly, it is hardly any women who are being invited to write. This is Physics News. Now, Physics News is the magazine of the Indian Physics Association, which is again not a research publication journal, but it is a magazine where physicists write sort of review articles of recent physics development and so on to a general audience. Sorry, not to a general audience, to a physicist audience. And again, authors are invited. And if you look at the gender fraction since 2010, sometimes it's even zero, but the best it is like less than 5%. And so we decided in 2017 to bring out issues where all the authors would be women. And our goal was not to showcase women's work. Our goal was to show that women are just regular scientists and they are as competent to write articles for a variety of audiences as men. And so we brought out Resonance and Physics News in March 2017 with all women authors, and I have not, they were all excellent articles, I can tell you that. And so this is a plot of the author distribution after that. And so you can see here in 2017, the gender fraction is pathetic here. There is very few women. And this is our issue, which had first author female, and because we had an all women authorship, all the first authors were women. There were some men who were co-authors, and then the thing dropped back to usual, right? So they didn't get the message for sure. it's interesting that in 2018, they decided to repeat the experiment and again brought out a March issue with only women authors. And if you look at the subsequent issues, the ratio's gone back except for this one, which is an issue which was guest edited by TNC Vidya. Sorry, there's a spelling mistake here. It is TNC Vidya. And here again, there is an issue which has not such a bad gender fraction, where the editor was Satyamurthy. So you can clearly see the bias of the editorial board here. So that clearly shows us that there is discrimination within the profession. So in other words, we are a flawed meritocracy. We claim to be a meritocracy. We claim that professional advancement, job hiring, and exam results, all of these are based on merit alone. But I've just shown you data which tells us otherwise. So what do we do about this, right? So it's not an easy problem at all to tackle, and the problem manifests at a whole variety of levels. And so it's complicated. So in 2019, that is last year, the Indian Physics Association we organized a national conference on gender equity in physics. The conference was titled Pressing for Progress 2019, and it happened in Hyderabad. So we sought to have a forum to debate the gender inequity problem, but we, for the first time, got people from all disciplines. That is, not all science disciplines. This was for physics. This was meant to be for physics. But we got people from other disciplines in the social sciences, in education, even in arts and performing arts and psychology and so on. We brought all these people together in order to debate this issue and see how we could address the problem of bias within the sciences. And we came out with something called the Hyderabad Charter for Gender Equity in Physics. So I just wanted to talk about that because it gives a sort of a starting document which gives us some ideas about how to go ahead with this. So, a charter is not a bunch of rules. It is just a sort of a position statement. It is which we hope will give people something to start debating about and then implement. Okay, so the fundamental principles of the charter are that people of all genders have equal potential to excel in all aspects of physics practice. This was for physics, so that's why we say physics, but I would say, this is actually true for any discipline or any branch. I mean, whether it is cricket or biology or painting, whatever you pick. People of all genders have equal potential to excel in all aspects. Utilizing the talents of all is essential for the physics enterprise to achieve its full potential, because if you don't utilize everybody's talent, then you're losing out. This is obvious, right? And this is again, I say it here for physics because the charter is for physics, but it applies to anything. So what are the guiding principles? The guiding principles follow from the fundamental principles. So the guiding principles are gender disparity in physics is due both to patriarchy in wider society and gender bias within the enterprise. So why do I say that? Because I showed you evidence that discriminatory familial responsibilities do impact the gender gap and are one of the causes of the gender gap. But they are not the only cause, and there is gender bias within the profession as well. Time alone will not achieve gender equality. and therefore conscious action is essential. This is really, really important. I showed you evidence for India in particular, where people have been talking about the gender gap for a long time. The first Indian National Science Academy report itself was in 2004. I mean, obviously people have been talking about it well before that, and the government has made statements and the government has put in money, all of this. Even so, things have not changed significantly. So definitely time alone will not achieve gender equality. Closing the quantitative gender gap at all levels of physics practice is a necessary step to achieve equality. The culture of physics, and here you can substitute science for physics, also needs to transform in order to make all talent feel welcome, be acknowledged, and used. The practice of physics is a social activity. So this is really important as well. The practice of science as a whole is a social activity. The practice of any collective enterprise, whether it's sports or dance or politics, all of these are social activities, and so addressing gender bias in all of these requires insights from the social sciences. This is really important. So as scientists, just because we know how protons and electrons operate or how cells evolve or whatever, that doesn't mean that we understand or we are competent to understand how people behave. So it is the social scientists who study how people behave. It is the historians who look at what has happened in the past and what lessons can we draw from them. And therefore, getting them into the discourse is very, very important. The interventions and strategies must be such that they do not endorse societal patriarchy. So this is also very important. So for example, there is a very common response when somebody says, oh, but there is a gender gap in the sciences. Somebody else will say, oh, let's give the women flexible working hours so that they can then, finish all their cooking and cleaning and then come to work. But this is an intervention. It might help some women. I mean, I'm not denying that it will not help a few women, but it does not address the root cause of the problem, because it's saying that women should cook and clean, and therefore let us give them more time to do that. It does not see cooking and cleaning as a collective responsibility. If it's cooking and cleaning within the household, that it is not seeing that as a collective responsibility, but it is seeing it as a discriminatory responsibility only on women. So one, can you hear me?
Yeah, all well. We can hear you.
Okay, because I got a message that my internet was unstable, so I was wondering. Yeah, so whatever interventions we design, they should not reinforce already entrenched patriarchal mindsets or climate or whatever. So that is the thing here. The interventions and strategies must be such that they do not endorse societal patriarchy. The interventions must adapt to the evidence from regular monitoring the status of the enterprise. So for example, I showed you earlier that there was no evidence supporting the idea that girls are not interested in science. But this was for India. In other countries, the situation is different. I mean, in the US, there was a huge concern that girls were not interested in science, in the UK as well. So they had to work very hard to counter that problem. Whereas in India, at least that problem was not as heavy. People tell me that it is getting worse, that it was different during my time when I was in high school, which was like 50 years ago, and that it is getting worse. Which is not very surprising because we have a generation that is, brought up on television and so on, where gender stereotyping is extremely heavy, and that is like an education that young people get. But nevertheless, one does need to look at the data. This is very, very important. When one designs an intervention, it has to be based upon whether there is data to support how the problem is cast. So people will talk about, let's have programs for girls, or UGC will say, let us have programs for women to upgrade their skills. But is there really evidence that women have less skills than men? Is that why there is a gender gap? I mean, upgrading of skills is needed by everybody. It's not just the women who need it, right? Some women might need upgrading in this skill, some may need upgrading in that skill. All of us are not, we are not sort of innately competent in every single dimension that is required in order to be academics. So we really need to look at the data. Is it really true? Again, there are science outreach programs for girls. The data that I have shown you doesn't support this idea that it is only the girls who need that outreach. Okay. Then here, when a process of selection reduces the gender fraction from that in the pool, it is a signature of a biased process. So I already gave you an example of the Indian Academy summer fellowships. So this at the bottom right, this plot where both the applicant gender fraction and the selected gender fraction has been plotted. And you can see that one almost exactly tracks the other. So this suggests that there is no bias, there is no gender bias in the process, because the applicant pool gender fraction and the selected pool gender fraction is the same. So this is very important, that when you have a certain process of selection, it is very important that we look at what is the gender fraction in the applicant pool and what is the gender fraction in the selected pool. And if there is a difference, then we need to accept that there is a bias in the process, and so we need to look at how can we mitigate that bias. And this is the example of the opposite. This is an example of the opposite, where the pool has almost 45%, or even if we look at 1995, the pool had 35% women, whereas the Academy Fellows has only 3% women. So this difference between 35% and 3% women, remember, this is not the total number, this is only the women. Why should there be only 3% women from the pool? That is a clear signature of bias in the selection process. So there is an article about the Hyderabad Charter for Gender Equity in Physics, which is published by the AAPPS, the Association of Asia Pacific Physical Societies. I thought I'd just put that up. And so here are the recommendations that we came up with. And we came up with recommendations, different sets of recommendations for institutions and departments, for physics teaching, for conferences, and for national agencies. Okay, so I'll just go over those. So for example, for institutions and departments, work-life balance policies such as childcare leave and mobility schemes should be gender neutral. So they can't be a different policy for men and a different one for women. And that is not the case now. For example, Government of India has a childcare leave policy for which you can take until your child is 18 years old, but men are not eligible for that, and so on. Criteria for hiring should be formulated beforehand, and there should be no hidden norms or no hidden criteria should be used in hiring. So for example, this idea that an institution will not hire couples, if that is indeed a criterion, that should be put in writing when they formulate the criteria and the advertisement for the position. You can't introduce criteria afterwards, which are not transparent and which nobody knows about, and we just get to know about it because of the whisper network. That is a clear path towards bias and discrimination. So the criteria have to be formulated beforehand. The age bar in hiring should be removed. This is again, it is not obviously a gendered policy, but it turns out that it affects the women much more than it affects the men. In any case, it is not a merit-based policy. So if we are saying we are a meritocracy, then we should stick to merit. The hiring process should provide full information on all the steps and timeline of hiring of all the candidates. The status, the position, the background of a life partner should not be a criterion in hiring. You might say, no, but that's never a criterion. We only look at merit, but it's not true. In practice, people do say, oh, but so-and-so's husband already has a job in the university. How can we give two salaries to the same family? I have actually heard people say these things. It is said, oh, but so-and-so's husband has a job in Kanpur. So she will not join here. So this is really problematic. I mean, if you can talk about what is the likelihood of a candidate willing to join, it's definitely a concern when you're hiring a candidate, but that issue should be raised only after you have made an offer. So that is why the next thing, the hiring processes should have a wait list, so that likelihood of joining is eliminated as a criterion for selection. So you select only on the basis of merit, you have a waiting list, and then you start negotiating with the top person, saying, will you accept this? Because the top person may accept it for a whole bunch of reasons, right? There are people who get job offers in more than one place. So then why is the likelihood of joining based on whether the spouse is somewhere else, or this person is pregnant, or she's likely to get married, or somebody saw that she had a boyfriend, etc., etc. All these kind of corridor talk should not be part of the hiring process, and as of now it really is. Self-declaration of sexual misconduct indictments should be mandatory for all staff applications. So here we are trying to address the very, very sticky issue of sexual harassment. There are all kinds of complications involved. There are legal complications involved. There are confidentiality complications involved. So we are just saying that institutions, instead of getting into any kind of legal tangles, they should simply require that each applicant should self-declare whether there has been any sexual misconduct indictment against them. That's all. Institutions should invest in diversity officers as observers on selection, hiring, and promotion committees. So the reason we say this is the following. Normally what happens is, and now there's a Government of India law rule also, that a selection committee should have at least one woman. And the idea is that by having that one woman, you're addressing any gender bias in the committee. Now there are two problems with this. That first of all, gender bias results from biased mindsets. And it is not only the men who have biased mindsets. Women also, all of us are brought up to accept sexist thought and sexist action. So all of us are vulnerable to be biased, because that's how we are raised, that's how we are socialized. So just because you put a woman there doesn't mean that the gender bias will be eliminated. That is one problem. But the second, almost worse problem is that, especially in departments where there are very few women, these few women get overburdened by having to serve on so many different committees. And that's really not right. It is just exacerbating the gender bias that is there already. So that is a real problem. And so that is why we are saying that there should be an external person who is an expert in diversity and inclusion. Doesn't have to be man, woman. They have to be experts in diversity and inclusion, and they should be there as observers on the selection, hiring, and promotion committee. So when they are there, for example, they may not know the technical details of that the position is about. But if somebody on the committee says, oh, but you know what, this person is not going to join, his wife is in Jabalpur, and we are in wherever, Bengaluru, and so it's not. So the diversity officer is going to say, stop. You did not put this as a criterion in your advertisement, so you cannot raise it as a factor. So that is the kind of role a diversity officer would play. Policies that facilitate spousal hiring, employment in the neighborhood, or transfer should be formulated. So this is something very ambitious, but it is something that has been put in place in the US. So for example, the way it would work is you hire a person solely on the basis of merit. And then when you offer the position to that person, and if the person says, yes, I'm willing to consider joining your institution, then you ask things like, what are the factors which will really ensure that you will come and join us? So do you have family constraints? Do you have a parent who is unwell? Do you have children who need good school education? Do you have a spouse who needs a job, etc.? So this would be asked not only of women, but of everybody, anybody, whoever tops your list, right? And then if there is an issue there, of course, then it doesn't work and you have to go to the number 2, whatever. But you ask these questions after having made a merit-based selection. And in the US, for example, what they do is they, not all institutions, of course, but institutions which have adopted these kind of policies, what they do is they find out what profession the spouse is in and try and see in their city, what kind of jobs could that spouse do. They look for schools. If the person has young children, then they look for schools. These are the good schools that you have. They give all this information. They help them, negotiate all those things. An extreme situation is where one full-time position, if the person they are offering the job to and his or her spouse are in the same discipline, working in the same lab, for example, they offer that they can split that position into 2. And so each of them takes half salary and both of them are hired. Even this has been done. I mean, that's very, very extreme, and it's a far cry in the Indian situation. But it just gives you a bar to aim for in this respect. I think I won't go through every single one of them, but yeah, this one I wanted to mention. There should be a mandatory gender audit of staff at all levels, and that should be on the organizational webpage. How many women and how many men at each level, professor, admin officer, whatever. And the institutions should adopt gender neutral language in their forms, in their documents, and in their daily practice. So some additional recommendations in other contexts. So in teaching, so this is physics teaching, but it applies to any discipline. So there is a need for a critical review of multiple choice based tests. I won't go into the details of this. I will explain this if somebody is particularly interested. There should be a sociology course on the social processes in science practice. It should be part of the graduate curriculum. So I would congratulate Manu, because they are indeed organizing this particular course is indeed such a course, and there should be more of it. It can be an example to develop upon. There should be concerted efforts at gender balancing role models in textbooks, in multimedia material, and so on. This is a very well-known thing. I think all of you know about it, that in our textbooks always the scientists tend to be portrayed, the male scientists tend to be portrayed. In physics, we have a really interesting example of, I don't know how many of you who are not in physics have heard of Emmy Noether. Emmy Noether was a sort of a mathematician, physicist kind of person, and she made a very, very profound contribution where she saw a relationship between symmetry and conservation laws. And this was very, very deep and very, very profound and not that easy to understand, right? And in physics, it's an extremely profound law. But when I was a physics student, I always learned about Einstein's law and Newton's law, obviously, and so on, Boyle's law, Kepler's law, what have you, but never learned about Noether's law, Noether's theorem. That name I did not know. And then it was much, much later that I did learn the theorem, but I did not learn that it was her theorem. And then much, much later, many, many years later, after my PhD and everything, as a professional, I sort of came across this, that it was somebody called Nether who first did this, and that she was a woman. Mathematicians tell me that they learn about it very early, so they know about this, and this bias is not there in mathematics. For some reason, in physics, it is there. So this is just one example of that. I will finish. I've come to almost the end. I won't go through these things for conferences and national agencies. I will if necessary. And so I just want to say that this Hyderabad Charter, we are taking it to physics professionals in India, and we are asking for endorsements from people who have physics PhDs and who are in India, whether in academia or not. And so, what does it mean to endorse this charter? So, it means that we broadly believe in the text of the charter, and we sort of are taking an informal pledge to implement the charter voluntarily in our spheres of influence. So, if we are a teacher, we implement it in our classroom, we implement it in our pedagogical materials. If we are in an SOC, Scientific Organizing Committee, for example, we implement it by having at least 30% women among the invited speakers, the participants, and the chairs of sessions, and that sort of thing. So this is what can you see the share, or is it not visible anymore?
It's blank now.
Okay,
The slide is
I
empty.
think some other slide came in my screen, so I'll just share it again. I'm not able to see this, but I just wanted to show one cartoon actually at the very end, so it's not such a big loss. Maybe my connection was unstable, but I'll stop here and take some questions.
We are viewing your screen, but some portion, yeah, now it's come.
Okay.
What does it mean to endorse? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, but I'll nevertheless stop here and take some questions, and I'll put up the cartoon in a bit.
Thank you, Professor Shastri, for a very important talk. And it should make many people thinking and working towards a more equitable space for all.
Okay, I wanted
Because
to
you
show
can't
this
talk
one
about.
thing,
Yeah.
Najam. So one very simple thing that everybody can do is to make sure that on their websites, when they list the academics, they are not listed, they are not sort of publicizing the marital status of the academics. And this very embarrassingly is the webpage of the Indian Physics Association, where despite our gender in physics working group and all that, they're still listing members, and advertising their marital status, although, you know, like what is the relevance of the marital status to being a member of the Indian Physics Association, right? You are a member of that association if you're a physicist, and you want to make change, you want to volunteer for the benefit of the physics profession, and how does your marital status matter? But it is still there, and I have noticed that this is there in a lot of websites of universities, colleges, and so on, even research institutions sometimes. And that is one thing that really should go. I mean, that's a very easy thing uh, to uh, to change. And yeah, so this was a slide which was not playing earlier. So gender sensitization training is very important, because we are all born, broadly speaking, maybe male, female, or something else, but we learn to be women or men, and so we are all prone to unconscious gender bias. And one mechanism to address bias is to make ourselves aware of it. So gender sensitization training is important for everyone. It should be done for scientists, administrators, students, contract staff, but most important, it should be regular and officially sanctioned, and it should be done for leaders of institutions. This is really, really important. And so I wanted to leave you with a cartoon that we did in the Resonance Special Edition thing in 2017 that I told you about. And this was done by somebody called Karnika Kahin, who's, Kanika Mishra, who's a cartoonist, and she has a comic called Karnika Kahe, and she did this cartoon for us. So I'll leave you with that, and you can tell me whether I should look at the chat window, or what I should do for questions.
Yeah, you can have a look at the chat window. Participants are requested either to unmute their mics and ask questions, or put up their comments or questions in the chat window.
Naja, maybe you should get the ball rolling with some
I
questions.
think you can read the comments. There are a lot of comments on thank you, ma'am, for a great session. Right,
Yeah,
Sabir?
but I can't imagine that everybody agreed with everything I said. That can't be true. So,
Ma'am, thanks to you. Clear gender clarity. That's Dr. Santosh. Thank you, ma'am, for a nice presentation. Very informative. Dr. Suryakant writes, thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful session with excellent PPT design.
yeah, but
And like you rightfully said, this issue is not only with men, but even agreed. There's more from the men's side, I have to admit. And things are slightly better in universities. The ratio of faculty is slightly more in universities because there's a 33% uh, requirement to have women reservation. It's not there in all universities, but Usmania had 33% reservation, so we did have a lot of ladies. Fortunately, Mano has a lot of ladies who have been given very high positions as directors of centers or deans of schools, and there are many professors who are women. Uh, they are heading academic sections or have been a registrar too. So things are better at our university too. And it's a battle which has to be fought from both the sides. It's an important thing, and Any comments, questions?
Yeah, so I don't think it is true that everybody agreed with everything that I said. So there's got to be something that you didn't agree with. So you should debate about that.
Uh,
Najam, why don't
is
you
the
start
question?
yourself?
Yes, yeah. Actually, I have been in certain interview boards, and I have had tough time with people because uh, very obviously, evidently, there was a girl candidate who was better than the males there, and they would say, "Nay, nay, we won't take this lady because it requires to go to observatory somewhere and observe or do something." And in the interview, I knew that this would come up, and I'd asked those people, "Would you be ready to go to say Tirupati and go and take observations or whichever place, Kavalur?" And they said yes, and they were the confident types. But when it came to finally shortlisting, it was always the PI of that project would say, "No, no, no, I don't want a lady. There can be issues." So this bias is there. I accept it. And the mindset has to change. It has to change. They have to realize that they are men who are meek, who are underconfident, who can't travel to dark and lonely places, and there are a lot of girls and women who can do that very confidently. So this has nothing to do with the gender, but these are the biases which the society has set, and they become so uh, ingrained in our system that we don't want to think away from it.
Yeah, so my point was that these kind of criteria, they should be willing to take responsibility for those criteria and say them. So they should say, I mean, are they willing to say that we think girls cannot go to observatories? Uh, if they are going to impose that criterion, they should be willing to state it. So the job advertisement should say that we will only take men because we think that women can't go to observatories, but they won't be willing to say that, right? So then it becomes an underhand criterion that you're using, and that is how we destroy the meritocracy, because we are not selecting on the basis of merit but on the basis of something else. I mean, I have been in interviews where people have said, they look at a woman and say, "Are you going to get married?" They would never ask that question to a male candidate, because there is this assumption that for the male candidate, it doesn't matter whether he's married or having an affair or whatever, it doesn't matter. It won't affect the job. It will only affect the job if it's a woman. Now, this is where the problem is. So I'm saying, formulate a job description, list out everything that that job requires. It requires maybe you have to stay late. It requires you to travel on the weekend, or it requires you to go to remote places for field work. But for observatory, or let's say a geologist or a botanist, they're already in the field, right? They came to the field because they were interested in the field, which means they are excited about going to an observatory. They are excited about going to Antarctica or wherever the remote Arunachal Pradesh to do field work. That's why they are in the field. That's why they are in that discipline. That's why they went to the trouble of getting a PhD and whatever. So even if you argue it through, it doesn't make sense. And from an ethical point of view, also, it doesn't make sense. It's unethical to put in criteria that you haven't stated in the advertisement, you haven't stated in the job description. So,
Exactly.
uh,
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. In fact, I have asked males in the interviews whether they were married, because I know what are the implications of that. Because even boys research scholars who are married, they also need to go back to their family and they keep running back. So we have selected, but knowing very well that he is married or she's married, uh, and the problem is equal for both the sides. If they are married, they have responsibilities. It's not that one person can just walk away and the other will not. It's a issue for both. So, like you said,
Right.
there should be a policy that if they are married, will not take them, or with side ask them to sign a bond or an agreement or loose agreement, whatever. That so many days we'll let you go and so many days you stay on.
Yeah,
Yes,
but alternatively, I feel it should be the selection should be merit based, and then you have a wait list, and you ask the top person, what can we, what else can we do to help you join us? We really, really want you because you're the top candidate, whether men or women, whatever, it doesn't matter. What can we do to help you to join? And then that boy might say, oh, but you know what, I'm hooked up with so and that so and so is somewhere else, and what do I do? And so then you might come up with some solution. Maybe you can do this, maybe you can take a little bit of extra leave if you some negotiation. But all that should happen after the offer is made, after you know that it cannot be a criterion when you're doing the selection. It can be a negotiation, after the merit-based selection. And then if it's too difficult, that person says no, won't work. Then you go to number two. That sort of thing.
that's
So I would like to invite all the physics PhDs who are in the audience. Presumably, you're all affiliated with Indian institutions. I would like to invite you to read the Hyderabad Charter and give your endorsement. So, if you're interested, do email me and I will send the document. I mean, I showed you the clauses and it's on the webpage of the Indian Physics Association, but I can send it to you by email and you can consider endorsing it. So if you are a physics PhD and in India, then we seek endorsements from them.
uh, you had said you wanted to share a questionnaire, and
But I thought that there wouldn't be enough time for it, and so I then
or you
decided to
can
not.
mail it to me and I can circulate it, and if you want, we can get it done later
Okay, how many days will this continue?
till Saturday.
Okay,
But
well,
they can
I'll
respond even later. That's not a
right,
problem. You
right,
need the data. So,
yeah.
so if there are no questions, there are only comments that people were very happy with your talk, and it really raises questions in all of us to see such a stark bias. Yeah, it's an issue which we have to all fight together. Thanks a lot, Professor Prajval Shastri. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Bye bye. So if there, we'll end the session today, and tomorrow let's meet again at 10. Thank you.